Hi everyone, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my fibroid and how it's impacted my pregnancy. So for my 20-week anatomy scan, my OB at the time sent me to a different center to get the anatomy scan. And this was primarily because she said they had better equipment there to be able to see the baby, and so I made that appointment. I was very nervous about this appointment. But all of my worries were geared towards the baby. I never was worried about myself for some reason. I was just worried about him and if he was doing okay. And so we had this appointment, and I already actually knew what the gender was. I took a blood test around 10 weeks. I think it was called the NIPT test. I'll have to check on that. But anyways, it came back and it said I was having a boy, so I already knew, and the doctor had told me that that was extremely accurate. And so even when I had got to the anatomy scan, I mentioned that I got that blood test done, and they let me know that, oh yeah, that's pretty accurate, but we'll check today to confirm. So we were there for probably about an hour and a half. They had us go in and they asked me a bunch of questions. And then my boyfriend, thankfully, was able to be there because some of my appointments so far with COVID, nobody's allowed to come with me. But for the most part, I was able to bring someone. So we just couldn't film anything that was happening inside of that anatomy scan. But they gave us a ton of pictures, so that kind of made up for it. So I'm laying on the table, I'm getting this ultrasound, and they're having me, move every which way. And she basically asked me, like, hey, have you ever been diagnosed with fibroids? And I had. In May, prior to me getting pregnant, I had been experiencing some really, weird symptoms. Like, my period has always been on time. I started my period very early at 9 years old in the 3rd grade. And that's a whole entire another video about that experience in itself. But ever since I was 9 and I got my first period, I've been extremely regular. I never miss, and it's just always been regular. So in the beginning of the year of 2021, I started to become irregular. Like, I missed an entire period, which was really weird for my body, and my doctor just kept saying, like, oh, it's probably stress, with COVID. And at that time I was in school and working, and so she was saying it was probably due to stress. So I was like, okay. And then I did get my period the next month, but then I started having irregular bleeding, which was also very weird for me. I'd never experienced that. And so I made an appointment with my doctor, and I let her know that I wanted to see an OB and I wanted to do, the necessary tests to figure out what was going on. So in May, they did a transvaginal ultrasound, and I made my first appointment with an OB to go over the results. So they found that I had a cyst on my ovary, and they were like, don't worry about it. The next time you get a period, the cyst will probably dissipate. So, and they also found a fibroid, but it was very small. So my doctor was like, don't worry about it. And I asked her, because at that appointment, my boyfriend and I had kind of talked about starting a family, but we always kind of talked about it as if we were going to start, in this year, 2022. So I also, since I was there at the OB, just wanted to kind of go over my health and just ask her, if I were to get pregnant, would it be safe? I also have a heart condition called SVT, and hormones can affect my heart rate sometimes. So I also wanted to ask her about if pregnancy could impact my SVT, and that's another video that I can make as well. I didn't know that so many women have SVT or POTS and different things like that. So I can definitely talk about my experience with my SVT while being pregnant as well. But so at that appointment, I asked her about the fibroid. I asked her about the cysts. Are these things that could impact me, my ability to get pregnant? And she was just like, no, like, you're totally fine. Like, from my standpoint, everything looks good, like, reproductive wise. If you wanted to get pregnant, you're gonna be completely fine. So, like I said, I didn't know anything about fibroids and cysts. I know that my mom and a couple other family members have both of them, but they've never affected them, so I didn't really think anything of it. So I, I was like, okay, like, everything checked out at the doctor's, like, I'm good. So at the ultrasound, she was asking me, like, hey, have you ever been diagnosed with fibroids? And I was like, I had went to the doctor in May because of some issues that I was having, and they did tell me that I had a fibroid. And she was like, well, do you remember how big it was? And I was like, it wasn't big at all. It was actually super tiny, and my OB told me not to worry about it. And she was like, it's not tiny anymore. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? And she was like, it's about the size of a grapefruit. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I know that's big, but for some reason I couldn't imagine like a grapefruit. And so she was like, at that time she was doing the ultrasound like over my stomach. So she was like, I see it, but I think we're going to have to do a transvaginal ultrasound. And she asked me if I consent. And I was like, yes, because, I want you to make sure like everything's fine. So she was like, when we do the transvaginal ultrasound, I'll be able to measure it more, but it's pretty big. So I was like, okay. So she does the transvaginal ultrasound, and you can see, like, honestly, when I saw it, I thought it was my baby's head. That's how big it was, and it was the same, like, round shape. And so I was like, oh, is that the baby's head? She's like, no, that's her fibroid. And I was just like, what? Like, I didn't even know fibroids could grow. I had no idea. So I'm laying there, and it's actually, like, makes sense because prior to this, I had brought up to my OB, because remember, I was at a different center for this anatomy scan. So I still have the same OB at that point that misdiagnosed me with the blighted ovum miscarriage. So she was actually the same OB that I saw in May when I was having all these issues and I was going over my transvaginal ultrasound. And she never once mentioned, like, my fibroid getting bigger. There was one point in time where I went to an appointment and she was like, oh, I see your fibroid. And I was like, is that good? Is that bad? And she was like, oh no, I mean, we're gonna see it on the ultrasound because it's there. But she was like, I wouldn't worry about it until the end of your pregnancy because there's sometimes when fibroids can cause bleeding and stuff. And she's like, but I think that's the only thing you're gonna have to worry about. And I was like, okay. And I didn't think anything of it. But I had started having pain down here on my right side. And I told my OB, like, is this normal? I'd be at work. And like I said, I'm a preschool teacher, so I was working at the time with 1-year-olds, and I would have to lift them, to change them or for bending up and down. And I was like, yeah, I'm just having a lot of pain on this right side. And she was like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, it's probably round ligament pain. So what she told me to do was get one of the pregnancy bands and see if that helped with the pain. So I ordered a pregnancy band, and it actually hurt more because the pain that I was having on the right side, it felt like I was, like, irritating it, almost like constricting something. So when she told me that I had this giant fibroid, I was like, okay, what side is it on? And she was like, it's on your right side right here. And she pointed right where I had been having the pain. And so I was like, I've been having pain for a few weeks. Do you think it's from that? And she was like, definitely. Like, it's big and, it's going to cause pressure and pain in that area. Like, fibroids can get very painful. So I was like, kind of confused because I'm like, why didn't my OB tell me anything? Like, she should have known, especially because she mentioned seeing my fibroid on the monitor, and she's the one that initially found my fibroid. So the ultrasound tech, when I told her all of this, was like, she definitely should have noticed that your fibroid was growing. She didn't say anything, and I was like, no, she she told me about risks later on in pregnancy and like maybe possible bleeding, but she didn't explain anything else. And so the ultrasound tech told me that pregnancy hormones feed fibroids. So that's why mine has grown as big as it is because of all the pregnancy hormones. And she was like, your OB should have known that, and she should have warned you about that possibility. And I had let her know that I went to her prior to even getting pregnant because we weren't trying. So I had went to her just, to make sure how my health was, and she didn't mention any of that. And so the doctor, or the ultrasound tech, was like, that's really strange. So she continues doing the transvaginal ultrasound, and then she tells us to wait in the room and that she's going to go give everything that she's found in the anatomy scan to the doctor, and then the doctor will come talk to us. So we waited for like 10 minutes, and we were looking over all the cute pictures that they gave us as a baby, because at this time, around 20 weeks, he was actually looking like a baby, not like a little bean or not like a little alien. He looked like a baby. So we were just looking at his pictures and waiting.